The desert moon KR7 had no official name worth remembering. It appeared on Beskari's star charts as a thermal anomaly orbiting a dead gas giant, a place of salt flats and sandstone canyons and air so dry it could crack the seals on a pressure suit in hours. Captain Sithral of the light cruiser Silent Fang had passed through this sector 19 times in his career and never once considered the moon worth a second glance. That changed when his sensor officer flagged a human scout ship drifting along the outer boundary of Viscari's sovereign space. Sithral studied the contact from his command chair, his tracking eyes locking onto the tiny blip with the automatic precision of a species built to notice things that move. The scout was small, unarmed, running passive sensors in a lazy orbit that suggested the pilot thought no one was watching. Mapping, most likely, charting jump routes through territory the humans had no business entering. He did not hesitate. One pulse burst from the Silent Fang's forward batteries caught the scout amidships, shearing through its engine housing and sending it tumbling toward KR7 in a long, ugly spiral. He watched through the orbital display as the ship carved a trench across a salt flat, throwing a plume of white dust that hung in the thin atmosphere like a scar. His claws rested lightly on the arms of his command chair. Standard intercept, clean shot, textbook. Sensors confirmed a single life sign in the wreckage. Weakening, but stable. Sethral opened a channel to the lower decks and summoned Pack Leader Thren. Thren arrived on the command deck already primed, his boost heart thumping a secondary rhythm beneath his ribs that Scythrel could hear from across the room. The Pack Leader was the best tracker on the ship, a compact Viscari whose mottled desert pattern fur was scarred from a dozen surface operations. His tracking eyes, oversized even for their species, had a quality of absolute focus that made subordinates uncomfortable. He selected 12 soldiers from the ready pool, the best sprinters in the crew, and loaded them into a drop shuttle without ceremony. 3 kilometers from the crash site. Dry heat. Open desert. 1 injured human. Estimated completion, 1 hour. Sethral settled deeper into his chair and turned his attention to other matters. Below him, the shuttle punched through KR7's thin atmosphere and touched down in a cloud of grit. Thren's tracking eyes locked onto the dark scar of the crash trail, and his boost heart primed its chemical reservoirs. 12 Viscari uncoiled from the shuttle in a spread formation, their digitigrade legs flexing, claws finding purchase in the salt crust. The air tasted of dust and scorched metal. They reached the wreck in under 4 minutes at a relaxed lope. It was worse than Scythral's sensors had suggested. The scout ship had broken apart on impact, its cockpit section torn open and half buried in compacted salt. Emergency foam had deployed across the interior, now hardening into a cracked yellow crust. Tools were scattered, wiring hung loose, blood still wet marked the pilot seat and the edge of the access hatch. But no pilot. Thren circled the wreck once, his nostrils flaring as he catalogued scent traces. Human sweat, iron-rich blood, a chemical sharpness he couldn't classify. The emergency kit was gone. 2 liters of water, a first aid pack, a survival blanket, a signal mirror. The pilot had stripped what she could carry and moved. Her trail led west toward a network of sandstone canyons, and Thren noted the stride pattern with professional interest. Limping, favoring the right leg, but the spacing between prints was consistent, deliberate. She was hurt, but she was thinking. Not panicking, he signaled his pack forward and felt the familiar rush of the chase chemistry flooding his muscles. 12 Viscari surged toward the canyons in a spread sprint, and the desert blurred beneath their feet. They picked up visual contact in 20 minutes. She was 400 meters ahead, moving through a shallow canyon at a pace Thren's tactical mind classified as barely above a walk. A human female in a torn flight suit, left arm bound against her body in a makeshift sling, dark hair matted with dust and dried blood. She moved with a shuffling, mechanical rhythm that looked to Viscari eyes almost comically slow. Thren's boost heart fired. The pack launched. The sensation was glorious. 12 bodies moving in concert, the desert floor hammering beneath their hind legs, the gap collapsing at a rate that would have been terrifying to any prey species in known space. 300 meters, 200. The canyon walls streaked past. 100 meters, and Fren could see the individual hairs on the back of her neck, could smell salt and blood and that strange chemical sharpness. Then the canyon turned, a narrow side passage, barely wide enough for one Beskari at a time, and the human had already threaded through it. Thren's pack compressed, jostling, their sprint form breaking as they squeezed through the gap in single file. They emerged on a ridge, and she was already descending the far side. 300 meters ahead again, moving at exactly the same pace she had maintained before. She had not sped up, she had simply not stalked. Thren's pack sprinted again. They closed to 150 meters across the ridge and burst onto a salt flat that stretched to the horizon, white and featureless, and offering nowhere to hide. Open ground, a killing field. Thren felt a pulse of satisfaction so deep it was almost chemical. They had her. The pack sprinted. 100 meters, 80, 60. Thren's tracking eyes were locked on the back of her head, his claws extended, his neurotoxin glands pressurizing for the bite that would drop her in seconds. 50 meters, 40. Then the soldier on his left stumbled, not tripped, stumbled. His boost heart had exhausted its chemical payload, and without that secondary surge of oxygenated blood, his muscles simply stopped cooperating. He dropped to his knees on the salt flat, fins snapping erect along his spine as his body dumped heat into the dry air. A second soldier went down, then a third. The sprint was over. Thren skidded to a halt, his own boost heart sputtering on fumes, and watched the human's figure recede across the white expanse. She did not look back. She did not speed up. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She just moved, that same shuffling mechanical rhythm, steady as water-wearing stone. 100 meters, 200, 3. From orbit, Scythral's tracking eyes snapped to the thermal display and locked onto a single warm signature crossing the salt flat at walking pace. He tried to look away and found that he couldn't. His prey drive had engaged, that deep ancestral fixation on moving targets, and it held his gaze on the screen with a grip stronger than conscious thought. His claws found the armrest of his chair and pressed in, leaving the first set of shallow grooves in the upholstery. 45 minutes. That was the minimum recovery time after a full sprint. 45 minutes of lying on hot salt while fins radiated heat and muscles slowly unlocked and the boost heart's reservoirs refilled with chemicals that were never meant to be depleted more than once in a single hunt. In 45 minutes, the human covered almost 4 kilometers. The pattern established itself over the next 12 hours with the grinding inevitability of something mechanical. The Viscari would rest, recover, sprint. Every time, they closed the gap. Every time, they got tantalizingly close. Thren got near enough to smell her once, really smell her, and his olfactory system recorded salt and old blood and something sharp and alien that he later learned was adrenaline, a chemical his species did not produce. Close enough to kill, not quite close enough to reach. Then the sprint would end and the soldiers would collapse and the human would keep walking, pulling away meter by patient meter, while 12 elite Viscari lay gasping on the desert floor with their cooling fins splayed like broken wings. Scythrale watched the tracking data accumulate on his display, and a cold understanding began to crystallize in his mind. The human's trace was a line. Not a fast line, not an impressive line, just a line drawn straight and steady across the desert floor, never spiking, never dipping, never stopping. His soldiers' traces were jagged, frantic things. Sharp peaks of speed followed by long, flat valleys of recovery. Sprint, collapse, rest. Sprint, collapse, rest. A failing heartbeat rendered in motion data. The human line never changed, it never wavered. It simply continued. He opened a channel to Thren. "Tell me what you see." Thren's voice came back ragged, his breathing audible, his usual clipped precision eroded by hours of fruitless pursuit. "She is using our speed against us, Captain. Every sprint costs us more than the distance it gains. She does not need to be faster. She just needs to never stop." His words dissolved into a cough. Scythral's heat dispersal fins extended along his spine without his permission, a sympathetic response to his soldiers' overheating that he found deeply embarrassing. He pressed them flat with a conscious effort. Hour 18, the youngest soldier in the pack, a first-rotation hunter named Vec, tried something different. He abandoned the sprint and rest cycle entirely and settled into a jog, attempting to match the human's pace through sheer will. Thren ordered him to stop. Vec did not listen. He lasted 6 hours. His boost heart, evolved for 90-second bursts of maximum output, could not process the sustained moderate demand. It misfired repeatedly, flooding exhausted muscles with surge chemicals they couldn't use, driving his core temperature past every safety threshold his body possessed. His fins locked in full extension, trembling as they tried to shed heat faster than his metabolism produced it. On a flat stretch of salt, mid-stride, his legs simply stopped working. He went down face first and did not get up. Kira Vasquez heard the impact behind her and stopped. She turned, and for the first time in 18 hours, the hunting pack saw her face, sunburned, dust-caked. Her eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles, and she was squinting against the light in a way that suggested her vision was blurring. She looked, Thren thought, from 200 meters back, like something that should have stopped moving a long time ago. The pack tensed, expecting her to approach the fallen soldier and finish him. Instead, she walked back to Vec with a careful, measured stride, knelt beside him, and began taking inventory. She unclipped his water canteen. She pulled the ration pack from his belt pouch. She worked the armored plate off his left forearm, examined it, and strapped it over her damaged shoulder sling with strips of torn fabric. His sidearm she left where it was. Then she pressed 2 fingers against the side of his neck, checking his pulse with a gesture so practiced it was clearly habitual. She unscrewed his canteen and poured a careful measure of water over his fully extended fins, and Thren watched the thermal bloom on his tracking display as the cooling effect took hold. A field treatment. Crude but effective. It would prevent the kind of permanent thermal damage that could kill a Viscari hours after a heat event. Kira capped the canteen, stood, adjusted the new armor plate on her shoulder, and resumed walking west. Same pace, same rhythm, as if nothing had happened. On the silent Fang, Scythe Rao replayed the sensor feed 3 times. She had walked back into range of 11 hostile soldiers to tend to the one who had collapsed chasing her, stolen his supplies with clinical efficiency, administered medical aid that demonstrated knowledge of Vescari physiology she should not have possessed, and left his weapon so he wouldn't be defenseless if something else found him. His claws sank deeper into the armrest. The upholstery split. Day 2 dawned over KR7 in a wash of pale amber light that heated the salt flats to blistering temperatures within an hour. Thren had lost 4 soldiers to exhaustion. Each time, the same grotesque ritual played out. The human would circle back, moving through the scattered pack with a scavenger's pragmatism, stripping water and rations and anything useful from the fallen soldier before checking their vitals and moving on. By mid-morning, Kira Vasquez looked like something assembled from spare parts. Vescari armor plates covered her injured shoulder and both forearms. A cooling fin membrane, peeled from an abandoned chest piece, wrapped her head against the sun. She carried 3 canteens and enough ration bars to last days. She had crashed with nothing. She was now better supplied than the soldiers hunting her. The irony was not lost on Scythe Rao, who had watched the inventory transfer through thermal imaging with a growing sensation he could only describe as vertigo. His species had a deep cultural mythology around the hunt, around the purity of the predator's advantage. What the human was doing was not combat, and it was not evasion. It was something closer to agriculture. She was harvesting them. The remaining 8 Viscari were in visible decline. Their boost hearts, hammered by repeated sprints over 18 hours, had begun to misfire at rest, sending random jolts of surge chemicals into muscles that were already cramping. Their fins were stuck in semi-extension, unable to retract fully, catching on rocks and dragging through sand as they walked. Because they were walking now. Not sprinting, not jogging. Walking. Their bodies had finally surrendered the pretense of pursuit speed, and what was left was a slow, painful march on legs that evolution had sculpted for explosive lunges, not sustained travel. Their digitigrade feet, with thick pads designed for grip during kills, were shredding on the abrasive salt crust. Kira's feet, in her pilot boots, were blistered and bleeding too, but human feet had been walking for 2 million years across every terrain the African continent could throw at them. Her body hurt. It complained loudly, in ways she narrated to herself in a mumbled monologue that drifted between tactical assessment and dark comedy. Okay, left boot's doing something weird. That's either a blister or my foot seceding from the union. Either way, not my problem. Keep moving. She named the landmarks as she passed them, a habit that had started as navigation and had become something closer to a conversation with the landscape. Ugly rock. The dip. That one that looks like Dave. She talked to the rocks in the sky, and once, during a rest stop that lasted exactly 20 minutes, she talked to a small desert lizard that regarded her with the flat indifference of a creature that had never been hunted by anything it couldn't outrun. "You and me both, buddy," she told it. "Slow and steady, right? Slow and steady." Friend called the silent fang and requested extraction. He kept his voice level, professional, but Scytheral could hear the shame underneath, corrosive and unfamiliar in a soldier of Thren's caliber. The request was clear: the pack could not sustain pursuit. The human was outpacing them at a speed any Viscari child could exceed. Scythril denied the request. The words came automatically, propelled by a certainty that 12 Viscari soldiers, the fastest predators in known space, could not lose to one injured human on foot. The math didn't allow it. The biology didn't allow it. There was a pause on the channel before Thren responded, and when he did, his voice held something Scythril had never heard from his pack leader before. "She does not know that, Captain." The channel closed. Scythril sat in his command chair with his fins fully extended and his claws buried in the armrest, and his tracking eyes locked on a display he could not look away from, and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Night fell like a door closing. The temperature on KR7 dropped 40 degrees in under an hour, plunging from scorching heat into a brittle cold that settled over the desert like glass. For the Viscari, already depleted and dehydrated, the cold was devastating. Their metabolisms, running hot all day, could not adjust fast enough. Core temperatures plummeted. Muscles that had been overheated and acid-flooded now stiffened in the dry, frigid air. Reaction times halved. 2 more soldiers collapsed, their system shutting down in a last-ditch effort to conserve energy. Not dead, but done. Kira was cold, too. She shivered violently as she wrapped herself in the survival blanket, and she allowed herself 20 minutes of sleep in the shelter of a sandstone overhang, curled tight with her arms around her knees. Her breath fogged in the thin atmosphere. Her body temperature dropped, but it did not plummet, because she was a mammal, and her blood kept moving at 37 degrees, because that was what mammalian blood did, had always done, would always do, regardless of what the air around it was doing. She woke, stood, checked her heading by the stars, and started walking again. From the desert floor, the remaining Viscari watched a single point of light moving through the darkness. Her headlamp, a small chemical glow stick from the first aid kit, bobbed with each step in a rhythm as steady as breathing. Thren lay against a rock with his 2 remaining mobile soldiers, his tracking eyes locked on that light with an intensity that had nothing to do with hunting. His prey drive had shifted during the night, rewired by exhaustion and something deeper, and now the fixation felt less like the focus of a predator and more like the vigilance of an animal watching something it did not understand and could not predict. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the light was still there on the inside of his lids, moving. One of his soldiers, a veteran named Sorath, whispered from somewhere in the dark, "What is she?" Thren did not answer. He did not have an answer. Everything in his training, his instincts, his species' entire evolutionary vocabulary described prey as something that fled until it was caught or until it found a hole deep enough to hide in. Nothing in that vocabulary described something that simply refused to stop walking. It was such a mundane thing, walking. Such a small, ordinary, unimpressive thing. And it was destroying them. Before dawn, Kira circled back. She moved through the scattered casualties with the same efficient compassion, taking water and rations, leaving weapons, checking airways and pulse points. She found the 2 who had collapsed from the cold and draped the survival blanket over the worst of the 2, tucking it around his extended fins with a care that made Thren's olfactory membranes sting in a way he could not explain. Day 3. The desert light came back merciless and white, and Sethral, who had not left his command chair in 30 hours, stared at a tactical display that told a story he did not want to understand. 6 Viscari remained on their feet, and the word was generous. They moved in a loose cluster, no longer a formation, stumbling over terrain. Their legs were not built to cross at this speed for this duration. Thren held the center by force of will alone, his boost heart issuing irregular thumps that he could feel in his teeth. Ahead of them, Kira had changed. She was no longer running, she was walking, slowly, and every few minutes she looked back over her shoulder at the ragged line of Viscari trailing behind her. There was something deliberate in those backward glances, something communicative, and it took Scythrall longer than it should have to recognize what it was. She was not fleeing anymore, she was leading. The realization hit him like a systems failure, cascading through his understanding of the last 3 days and rearranging every assumption. He pulled up the topographical overlay and traced her path, that steady, unbroken line, and saw where it was going. West. Always west. Back toward the crash site, back toward the wreck of her scout ship, where an emergency beacon sat in the shattered cockpit, waiting. If she activated that beacon, the human rescue patrol would triangulate the signal within hours. She needed his soldiers too broken to stop her. She needed them strung out across 15 kilometers of desert, scattered like debris from an explosion, unable to sprint, unable to sprint, unable to fight, unable to do anything but watch. For 3 days, the Viscari had been hunting. They had been so certain of this that it had never occurred to any of them to question the fundamental assumption. But the human had not been fleeing. She had been working, patiently, methodically, with the grinding relentlessness of erosion. She had been dismantling 12 elite soldiers using nothing but forward motion and the biological fact that her species did not stop. They had been herded. Sethral opened a channel to Thren. His voice, when it came, was stripped of authority. Abort. Get out. She is leading you to the beacon. Thren stood on a ridge and looked at the desert ahead, where a single human figure walked without urgency toward a distant smear of wreckage on the salt flat. He looked at his soldiers, hollow-eyed and swaying. He looked at the footprints stretching behind them, 15 kilometers of evidence that something fundamental had gone wrong with the universe. We cannot abort, Captain. We cannot move fast enough to reach extraction before she reaches the beacon. A breath. She is not faster than us. She was never faster than us. She just never stopped. The channel stayed open. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the desert wind and the distant, steady crunch of human boots on salt. Kira reached the wreck at midday. She climbed through the torn hull with the slow, careful movements of someone who had been awake for 60 hours and running for most of them, and she found the emergency beacon wedged beneath a collapsed instrument panel. The housing was cracked. The power cell had jarred loose on impact. She sat in the shade of the cockpit, drank the last of her stolen water, and went to work. A multi-tool from the first aid kit, wiring scavenged from the cockpit displays. Her hands shook, and she dropped the power cell twice before seating it properly, swearing each time in a hoarse voice that cracked on the consonants. The third time, she held it in place with her teeth while she soldered the connection, and she laughed at herself while she did it. A sound so broken and raw, it barely qualified as human. "Come on," she muttered to the beacon. "Come on, you piece of junk. I did not walk for 3 days to lose a fight with a battery." Outside, footsteps crunched on the salt. Thren stood at the edge of the wreck, leaning against a sandstone boulder because his legs would no longer support his weight unassisted. His 2 remaining soldiers had collapsed 200 meters back, face down on the flat, fins extended and motionless. It was just him. He had his neurotoxin bite, the last weapon his body still possessed. And if he could close the 15 meters between them, he could end this. He looked at the human. She looked at him. Her face was a ruin of sunburn and dust and dried blood, her eyes red-rimmed and barely focusing. And she held a Viscari forearm blade across her knees with the casual grip of someone who had been carrying it for 2 days, and no longer thought of it as a weapon, but as an extension of her hand. 15 meters of sand between the fastest predator in known space and a mammal who could barely stand. Neither of them moved. Kira, without breaking eye contact, reached behind her and pressed the beacon's activation switch. A low hum filled the wreck as the signal pulsed outward, climbing through KR-7's thin atmosphere and into open space. Somewhere, a human ship would hear it. Somewhere, rescue was now a matter of hours. She looked at Thren, and her cracked lips moved. "You are fast," she said. Her voice was a rasp, barely human. "I will give you that." Thren's tracking eyes, which had been locked on this human for 72 consecutive hours, disengaged. It was not a conscious choice. There was no decision, no moment of release. His prey drive, that oldest and deepest of Viscari instincts, simply reclassified her, and the fixation ended like a wire being cut. She was not prey. She had never been prey. His biology had been wrong about that from the first moment. And it had taken 3 days and 15 kilometers and every soldier under his command for his instincts to catch up with what his mind had understood since hour 18. He did not have a word for what she was. He sat down in the sand. He did not try to close the 15 meters. She sat in the shade of the wreck with the blade on her knees. They waited, two exhausted animals at the end of a chase that had inverted every rule either of them had ever known. The human rescue ship arrived 4 hours later, a heavy frigate that descended through KR-7's atmosphere with the confidence of a species that had already won. They found Lieutenant Kira Vasquez sitting in the shade of her wrecked scout ship, wearing pieces of Vescari armor over her torn flight suit, surrounded by a trail of collapsed alien soldiers stretching 15 kilometers into the desert behind her. A medic reached her first and she waved him off, pointing instead at Thren, who sat against his rock with his fins dragging in the sand and his tracking eyes staring at nothing. "Take him too," she said. "He needs fluids." They did. Scythrall withdrew the silent fang from the sector without engaging the rescue frigate. He watched it depart through a viewport he did not remember walking to, his tracking eyes following its engine signature until it vanished, and then following the empty space where it had been for several minutes more. His after-action report to Viscari High Command was classified at the highest level. It described a biological capability that appeared in no Viscari threat database, no xenobiological survey, no tactical manual in their civilization's history. Sustained locomotion over multi-day periods at speeds that appeared trivially slow, but which no species optimized for burst performance could match or outlast. He noted that the Viscari had always categorized species along a single axis, predator or prey, and that this classification was determined by speed. Humans did not fit the axis. They were not fast. They were not slow. They were something else entirely. Something his language did not have a word for, and the closest he could come was a description. They are what happens when a predator species evolves to hunt, not by being the fastest thing on the plane, but by being the last thing still moving. He recommended that the Viscari never again pursue a human on foot, under any terrain conditions, for any reason. He flagged the recommendation as highest priority. He suspected it would be ignored. He included the tracking data anyway. The attachment was a single image, 72 hours of movement data compressed into overlapping traces on a topographical map of KR-7's desert. The Viscari traces spiked and crashed, like the readout of a heart in cardiac arrest, sharp peaks of speed dissolving into long, flat valleys of nothing, a pattern of diminishing returns, each spike lower than the last, each valley longer. The human trace was a single, unbroken line. It crossed the map from the crash site to the beacon without a single interruption. No spikes, no valleys, no stops. Just a line drawn at a pace so steady it looked mechanical, so relentless it looked inevitable. Scythrall stared at it for a long time. His tracking eyes locked onto the line and would not release. And this time he did not fight them. His fins lay flat against his spine. His claws rested in the deep grooves they had carved into his armrest over 3 days. The command deck was quiet around him. His sensor officer had left hours ago. The bridge crew moved in silence, giving their captain the same wide berth they would give a wounded animal. He thought about speed. His species had built their entire civilization around it. Their architecture was designed for quick movement through corridors. Their ships were the fastest in the sector. Their language had 47 words for different types of acceleration, and only one word for endurance. And that word was a pejorative, used to describe species too slow to be worth hunting. He had never questioned the assumption underneath all of it, the bone-deep certainty that speed was the supreme biological virtue, that what was fastest was what survived. The line on his display did not care about speed. It did not spike. It did not crash. It simply continued. "We are sprinters," he wrote in the report's final annotation. "They are the horizon. You cannot chase the horizon. You can only run until you fall, and when you open your eyes, the horizon is still there, still the same distance away, still moving at the same speed it always was. They do not stop. That is their weapon. That is all they need." He filed the report. He sealed the classification. He sat in his chair and looked at the tracking image one more time, that single flat line cutting across the desert like a crack in the world. And then he closed the display and let the darkness of the command deck settle around him. Somewhere, in a human medical bay, a woman with sunburned skin and blistered feet was letting a medic set her dislocated shoulder properly for the first time in 3 days. She was telling the medic about the desert, about the rocks she had named, about a lizard she had talked to at dawn on the second morning. She was laughing about it, that broken, raspy laugh of someone who had been awake too long, and the medic was giving her fluids and telling her to stop talking and rest. She didn't stop talking. She didn't rest. She was human. She didn't know how.